Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry about that. I had to take a look at my internet because it looks like I wasn't connecting. But I'm sure it's fine now, and I'm sure I'm all right now. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. I can see you there, and that tells me that it's working properly now. Thank you very much. I'm going to start this all over again, and like I said, I was talking about a lady. I had this opportunity to give her a ride some time ago, and on the way, she started to talk to me about her life. And she was a married woman, and she and her husband, they were Christians. They were actually Christians, and they were workers even in their church. And this, as soon as she said this, it's kind of validated the fact that domestic violence do occur even in the Christian community. And one thing I want us to know is that in the book of Job, Bible said that when the sons of God presented themselves, Bible said Satan also presented himself. And so which tells me that in the Christian community, domestic violence can occur. Remember, the church is a public place. The church is a public place, which means anybody can walk into the church. And so which means you would have people that are not Christians, you will have Christians there. And so which tells me that domestic violence, it happens in the Christian community. And so this lady happened to, for some reason, after a few years, her husband started beating her and inflicting her with physical injuries. But because it was her home, she felt it wasn't proper for her to report to the police. And it took her a while for her to report to her pastor. And unfortunately, when she managed to report herself, to report the incident to her pastors, unfortunately, they didn't know how to deal with this situation. And so, for some reason, they couldn't inform her appropriately. And so, she went on with this for a long while until the man actually pushed her out and actually brought in another woman into the house. And she said in the course of the time when she was there, each time the man beat her in the house, she said the man would run to a corner of the house and the man would start asking God for forgiveness. And so, two things I'm bringing out from this story. The first one I've told you, domestic violence can happen in the church. That is one. Number two, it also tells me that God does not like violence. Remember that each time the man beat her, the man will run to a certain corner of the house and the man would start asking God for forgiveness. And so which tells me that the man understands that God does not like violence. And if you look into the Bible and you check Psalm 11 verse 5, the Bible says, the Lord tried the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence, he so hates them. And so which means God hates violence. There is no doubt even about that. Anyone that engage in violence, God hates such persons. And so today, I would inform us about the definition of domestic violence. And I'm going to be reading this out to us. And it's just the government's definition of domestic violence in the UK. And it says, any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behavior, violence, or abuse between those aged 16 or over who are or have been intimate partners or family members regardless of gender or sexuality. But in the course of our series, we're going to be dealing with domestic violence in couples relationships. And when we talk about this, which means we're going to be talking about husband and wife, and then we're going to be talking about their children. We're going to be talking about the effects of this so that everybody, all of us, can understand. And personally, I believe one thing, that all perpetrators, when I say perpetrators, I mean the abusers. Every perpetrator understands what he or she is doing. And so when anybody goes into violence, I believe the person understands what he or she is engaged in. But I want to believe that not everyone is wicked. I want to believe that some people do not understand the effect of their behavior on their fellow human being. Because if they understand, especially on their spouse, if they understand the effects of this violence on their spouse, I want to believe they wouldn't do it, or rather they would stop it. And so one of the objectives of this series I'm taking is to be able to expose the effects of this, even on the women and on the children, or on the woman involved and on the children. And violence will, once there's violence, it affects the whole family. It's going to affect the man, it's going to affect the wife, and it's going to affect the children. And so I'll be speaking to us about the different forms of domestic violence, because I want to believe that when we begin to expose these things out, one way or the other, people would change. And so today, being the first of this series, we're going to be talking about the subject of domestic violence. I've heard some people ask me, what do you mean by domestic violence? What is actually domestic violence? And so I'm going to be talking about the different forms of domestic violence that we have, because everyone feels it's about beating. Everyone feels it's about physical injuries. Everyone feels it's about slapping the other person. Everyone feels it's about killing the other person. I'm telling you the fact, domestic violence is not only about beating. There are some other types of domestic violence that they may not kill the spouse. They may not kill the spouse physically, but they can kill the spouse mentally. They can kill the spouse in their mind. They can kill the destiny of the spouse. And so this is also murder, spiritual murder, mental murder, and so emotional murder. And so it is not only about physical murder, it is also about emotional, it is also about mental. And so all these things I want to be exposing in today. I want to be exposing in the session that I'm taking us through even today. And so the first one I will speak about is the one that every one of us know, and that is physical form of domestic violence. A physical form of domestic violence means inflicting or attempting to inflict physical injuries, e.g., for example, grabbing, pinching, slapping, hitting, biting, and punching. And so the very first form of physical violence that we all know is the first one I'm talking about, and that is the physical violence. It means it includes beating, it includes slapping, it includes inflicting any form of physical injury on the spouse. Remember, we're dealing with domestic violence in couples relationship. And so that's what I'll be talking about. That's what we're dealing with today. And so the physical domestic violence, it also means withholding access to resources. Withholding access to resources of health care resources, medical care, withholding access to food, withholding access to fluid, withholding access to anything medical care, wheelchair, withholding access to anything, in order to that can be used to maintain care, health care. And so this is the very first one, physical form of domestic violence. And then I'll speak about the second one, which is the verbal form of abuse. We can also say it is the emotional form of abuse. And this is when a perpetrator. Remember when I say a perpetrator means the abuser. And so this means when a perpetrator is inflicting, undermining or attempting to undermine another person's or the spouse's sense of self-worth. And I'm sure you understand what I mean. This is when the self-esteem of the other person is reduced. This is when insults are being passed on the other person. This is when names calling your spouse different forms of names, belittling your spouse, undermining her ability, undermining the capacity that God has given to her. I'm telling you, emotional violence is also as bad as physical form of violence. Emotional violence can actually cause mental disorder. Emotional violence can cause depression. Emotional violence can cause a low sense of self-esteem. And the thing is this: once this starts, the other person would get so reduced that she wouldn't even believe she could attain or amount to anything at all. That is the second form of physical domestic violence. And then I'll talk about the third one, which is sexual. The sexual form of domestic violence. That is when there's coercing or attempting to coerce any sexual contact. And this includes marital rape. I'm sure you will ask me, marital rape? Yeah, there's marital rape. Marital rape normally occurs within a relationship where there is no joy. When a husband and his wife, when they are in constant argument, when they are not together, when their hearts are not united, there could be marital rape. And that is why clergy or pastors should encourage their partners to live, or rather to encourage a lot of marriage seminars or programs or seminars that would bring couples together, enlighten them. And in each of them, make sure you are talking about domestic violence so that at least everyone is aware and everyone can make sure that it does not inflict domestic violence on the other person. And so the sexual domestic form of violence. Also, we have the financial. The financial, that is when a perpetrator is making or attempting to make the victim financially dependent on him. Have you not heard of stories where a man would take loans in the name of his wife and will force the wife to pay for the loan? Have you not heard of cases where the man would use up the credit card of the woman and will force the woman to pay? That is financial violence. And in cases where the other person is even forbidden not to work, or rather asking the person to continually stay at home without doing anything, that is all part of financial form of domestic violence. And then there is the fifth one, which is the psychological. The psychological is also a very bad one. That is when a perpetrator, remember, a perpetrator is an abuser. When a perpetrator is instilling or attempting to instill fear, causing intimidation, threatening physical harm, attempting to isolate the victim even from her friends, that is psychological form of domestic violence. And so I've spoken to us here about 5. Remember, the first one, physical form, which is the one everyone knows. And then we have the emotional one, which is also verbal, when you are calling your spouse different names, when you are cursing your spouse, when you are cursing your spouse, when you are belittling your spouse, when you are reducing a sense of self-worth. That is all part of emotional domestic violence. And the third one is sexual. Sexual includes marital rape, authoritarian rape, and when the other person is being forced to go into sexual acts without our consent. And I would encourage every pastor in the Pentecostal community listening to me, I would encourage you to do more of seminars that would encourage spouses to live in peace. And in each of these seminars, make sure you're talking about domestic violence. Make sure you're exposing the demon called domestic violence. And then that's the third one. Remember, the fourth one is the financial one. The financial one, when the other person, when the perpetrator is making sure that the victim is solely dependent financially on himself. That is the fourth one. And then we have the psychological. Psychological is when a perpetrator is trying to instill fear in the other person so that everywhere she goes. And one of the ways, or rather one of the characteristics of a victim of domestic violence is fear. Anywhere you see them fearing. They're always, in fear. And in all of these things, in all of these ones, I will read to us. There's a penalty now, which I want to encourage all of us to listen to and to hear. In the UK, the government in the UK, if you read the House of Commons briefing papers, there's a new criminal offense. I'm going to read that. There's a new criminal offense of coercive or controlling behavior against an intimate partner or family member, which came into force on the 29th of December 2015. The offense was created following consultation through Section 76 of the Serious Crime Act 2015. The maximum penalty for someone found guilty is 5 years. And this has now been put, this is now active this year. This is active this year from January this year. And so the penalty for domestic violence is 5 years imprisonment, a fine, or both of them. And so I would encourage every pastor in the Pentecostal community to speak about domestic violence to your congregation. Speak about it, because I want to believe, because as a pastor, you are in the position of authority. And many times your congregation would listen to you. Many times they will listen to what you have to say. And one of the ways you can help them to grow in the relationship is to expose domestic violence. Let them understand the effect of domestic violence even on their spouse. Let them understand why they've got to live together in unity. Let them understand the importance of being together. Let them understand the importance of not going even into violence. Remember, Psalm 11 verse 5 even told us that God hates everyone that is